Hey everybody, and welcome to our Does God Exist project, where we're producing a series of videos that make the cumulative case for the existence of God and the resurrection of Jesus. If you enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. If you want to help me make more of these videos, you can visit the Patreon link in the video description. Also, make sure that you hit the notification bell so that you don't miss an episode. Let's get started. All right, so tonight our teaching is going to be on how to defend the resurrection of Jesus. Do you think that'd be useful in your Christian journey? How to defend the resurrection of Jesus. And you'll find that the facts that support the resurrection of Jesus defend themselves. And so if you'll just be knowledgeable of the facts regarding the issue of his resurrection from the dead, all you have to do is present the facts, and the resurrection will defend itself. Amen? And God doesn't need a defender, but my people perish for a lack of knowledge. And the Apostle Peter says, always be ready to give an answer, or an apologia is the Greek word, where we get our word apologetics. Be ready to give an apologia, to give an answer for the hope that lies within you. And so we want to be able to give an answer for the question, how do we know that Jesus resurrected from the dead? Amen? So I encourage you to take notes tonight, because I'm going to really be going through a lot of facts that will be very helpful to your life, especially as it relates to sharing the gospel with people who don't know the Lord. And so we're going to go through that within the next couple of days. This will be placed on YouTube. If you've had a chance to join the YouTube channel that I have, you'll see this go on there, so you can kind of go on the channel and just rewatch this if you want to kind of just remind yourself of some of the things that we're going to go through tonight, because there's quite a bit, and we're going to crunch it into hopefully 30 to 45 minutes. All right? So a couple of things to keep in mind before you begin jumping into the question of how to defend the resurrection of Jesus. We want to keep these things in mind. The New Testament Gospels are eyewitness testimonies, okay? These are verifiable eyewitness testimonies. A guy named Warner Wallace, who was a previous cold case detective in Los Angeles, was also a non-believer. When looking at the Gospels, he was able to come to the conclusion, based on an outsider just reading them as a literary document, that these were genuine, authentic eyewitness testimonies of events that did take place, okay? What's the difference between a historical record and an eyewitness testimony? Let me give you an example. The news is going to report sometime this week that Donald Trump did such and such inside the Oval Office. But was the news channel actually there inside the Oval Office, eyewitnessing what Donald Trump did? Depending on the answer to that question, will tell you whether or not what the news reports later on this week or next week, whenever they report it, is hearsay or eyewitness testimony. Do you see where I'm going with that? So the difference between the biblical data and extra-biblical data is just that. That's why when you hear a skeptic, and we'll get into this in just a moment, say, well, what extra-biblical evidence do you have for the resurrection? It's really the wrong question to be asking, because now you're asking for hearsay. You're asking for a Roman historian who wasn't close to the event to give you their opinion about what they heard from secondary and third and fourth-hand sources. The best evidence is the eyewitness accounts themselves, so keep that in mind. Also, keep this in mind. The writings of the apostles are historical records. For example, the Apostle Paul in Galatians, and I believe in some of his other epistles, I believe in 1 Corinthians, he gives some information, some historical information about how he came to become an apostle, where he got his gospel from, and that what he was teaching the Christians that he was writing to was still the same gospel that he received in the very beginning. We know the Apostle Paul had his Damascus Road experience somewhere around 35 AD. Jesus Christ died around 33 AD. Now you give or take 3 or 4 years. One way or another, the Apostle Paul had his radical conversion approximately 2 years after the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So we have very, very close to the event historical data from the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. And then also keep this in mind. The New Testament is the most reliable ancient work of literature. We talked about this at the beginning of last month, where we had Dr. Derek West come in, who has his doctorate in New Testament studies, and namely in the reliability of the New Testament documents themselves. And he showed you that there's around 5,700 or so Greek manuscripts of the New Testament dating back to the very early beginning. And we have no other historical document that even comes close to that. So the New Testament is actually your best source of evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. This is why it is the main compilation of writings that early Christians used to prove their case. Why? Because these were eyewitness records. So the idea of proving the resurrection with the Bible is actually legitimate when you understand the Bible to be a collection of historical writings from eyewitness individuals. Okay? Now we did touch on this for just a moment, but you want to keep this in mind. Extra biblical references also mean outside the sphere of the eyewitnesses themselves. It's okay to quote extra biblical references. I'm going to quote just a few tonight, but they are not the best ones. And I would encourage you to share that with any skeptic that you come into contact with that has that question. Well, you're using the Bible to prove the resurrection. They need some education on what the Bible is, how reliable it is, and how these are eyewitness writings, number one. Number two, they need to understand that extra biblical references, they shouldn't put more stock in those, even though we have extra biblical references to support the life, ministry, teaching, and death and resurrection of Jesus. They shouldn't put more stock in extra biblical than they do in the biblical ones. Because when you just take these as literary documents, set aside the term Bible and just look at the New Testament records and the extra biblical records as documents, which is exactly what they are. We've just put them into a bound thing that we call the Bible, which is a book with multiple. It used to be a bag of scrolls back in those times. So when you take those as just documents, extra biblical or outside the sphere of the eyewitnesses is actually not that strong of a record. Your strongest record, just as if you were a detective, would not be, that's why in court hearsay doesn't hold up. It's going to be from those who were closest to the event, able to tell exactly what took place. Okay? So we need to keep those things in mind when we're talking about this. But I'll give you a couple of extra biblical references just so you know that we have good evidence there, and you can share some of these things with non-believers. There was a Roman historian named Tacitus. Anybody ever heard of Tacitus? He was very prominent. He had this to say about Jesus. He said, Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out, not only in Judea, the first source of evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. So Tacitus wasn't a Christian, but he admits Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and that afterwards a superstition broke out. And it began in Judea, and it made its way to Rome. What was the superstition? That he had resurrected from the dead, obviously. So we have Tacitus, a prominent, very hostile to the Christian writer, stating, hey, this is a true historical man whose followers believed something superstitious about him. Josephus, in his writings, I'm not going to quote all of his writings, but from the compilation of Josephus' writings, who is a Jewish Roman historian, during the time just after Jesus, actually he wrote more in the period of the Roman conquest of Jerusalem and Judea, which was around 70 A.D. all the way through about 110 A.D. Is most of the span of time that Josephus wrote in. But he wrote about things all the way back to Herod the Great. Here are some of the things. We have 9 facts about the historical Jesus that the consensus of scholars agree upon just from the writings of Josephus. Number 1, Jesus existed as a man. Okay? And these are just without even going to the Bible. Number 2, his personal name was Jesus, which was Greek for Yeshua, his Hebrew name, Yeshua. Number 3, he was called Christ or the Messiah. Number 4, he had a brother named James. You know, Josephus actually writes about the martyrdom of James. Number 5, he won over both Jews and Greeks in his ministry. Number 6, Jewish leaders of the day expressed unfavorable opinions of Jesus. Number 7, Pilate rendered the decision for him to be executed. So now we've got both Tacitus and Josephus both naming Pilate as the one who authorized the crucifixion of Jesus. He also confirms, number 8, that he was in fact executed by crucifixion under Pilate. So not only did Pilate order the crucifixion, but he saw it through to its final end. That is, Jesus died under Pilate. And then number 5, his followers subsequently believed that Jesus rose from the dead. So we have both Tacitus and Josephus saying there was a man named Jesus who was called the Christ. Even Tacitus calls him Christus. The word Christus means anointed one. It's the translation of the same Jewish word for Messiah. So we have Tacitus and Josephus saying, okay, there's someone who claimed to be the Messiah, died by crucifixion under Pilate, and subsequently his followers had a superstition about him, according to Tacitus, and according to Josephus, they believed that he had came back from the dead. Okay? Good stuff so far? Everybody tracking with me? All right. Regarding the time, the span of darkness, you know, when Jesus was crucified, there was darkness over the land. We actually have a couple of extra biblical references to that. Did you ever know that? Pretty interesting. In about 52 AD, a historian named Thallus wrote a history of the Eastern Mediterranean world from the Trojan world all the way to his own time, okay? Now, the work itself has been lost and only fragments of it exist in citations of other scholars of his time. One such scholar who knew and spoke of it, his name was Julius Africanus, and he wrote around 221 AD. In speaking of Jesus' crucifixion and the darkness that covered the land during this event, Africanus found a reference in the writings of Thallus that dealt with this cosmic report. And here's what he says. Thallus says, "On the whole world there pressed a most fearful darkness, and the rocks were rent by an earthquake, and many places in Judea and other districts were thrown down. This darkness Thallus, in the 3rd book of his history, calls, as appears to me without reason, an eclipse of the sun." So Thallus says, well, it must have been a solar eclipse, and so forth. But he does attest in 52 AD, not long, I mean, just, 19 years after the resurrection, that in the time of Jesus, there was a great darkness that spread over the whole land of Judea. We also have a guy named Phlegon, who was a Greek historian who wrote an extension chronology in around 137 AD. In the 4th year of the 202nd Olympiad, which is actually, it translates to AD 33, there was the greatest eclipse of the sun, and that it became night in the 6th hour of the day, or otherwise known as noon, so that the stars even appeared in the heavens. There was a great earthquake in Bithynia, and many things were overturned in Nicaea. And so this is another reference to the exact year of Jesus' crucifixion, of this massive eclipse of the sun taking place. He gives the exact hour of the day, which corresponds with the gospel writings. So extra biblical evidence is there. I only gave a few pieces. We would actually have to do a whole seminar on just the whole compilation of extra biblical. But let me explain to you why I don't actually use this as a starting point. Because of exactly what I said earlier. It's not the best evidence. So my opinion, when you are reasoning with somebody regarding the resurrection of Jesus Christ, you may only have a short period of time to reason with them. And I think we should always come with the best evidence. This may take a little bit of education about, what the New Testament records are themselves, but they are, in comparison with all other records we have about Jesus, they are the closest to the event. And there are many reasons that we can believe in their reliability. Namely, what's great about the apostles' martyrdom is that it authenticates the fact that what they documented about their witnessing of events they at bare minimum believed it sincerely and wholeheartedly to be true. Otherwise, they wouldn't have died for it. So you can, even if you're not a Christian, you have to admit that the apostles gave eyewitness testimony of something that they absolutely were convinced that happened before their very own eyes, and they authenticated their belief in the validity of their eyewitness testimony by their own deaths. And that's what's so great about the martyrdom of the apostles and Jesus even, and it's not great, obviously, that someone had to die, but you get where I'm going with it, right? Jesus prophesied that they would be martyred, all except John, who they tried to kill by boiling him in oil, and apparently the anointing on John's life was so powerful that it wouldn't kill him. And so they exiled him to Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelation. All right, so far so good? You guys tracking with me? So extra biblical evidence is there, but it's not the best evidence. You can use it, but I would say use it on the fringes of the actual evidence, coming directly from the apostles themselves. Let's talk a little bit about the minimal facts argument. This is where we're getting into the actual evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. Dr. Gary Habermas, one of the most renowned scholars on the New Testament Jesus, gave what many people call the argument that changed a generation. And Dr. Habermas decided not to use any facts that did not have multiple lines of evidence and scholastic consensus among experts in the field of New Testament studies. So what that means is that there is a whole boatload of evidence that we can use to point people to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But Dr. Gary Habermas says, how can we simplify this to the most basic facts that all have, and in some instances he admits that some of these 6 facts actually have up to 100 pieces of data supporting them. So he said, let's get facts that have multiple lines of evidence and that are not objected to by any scholars in the field. So you've got scholars who have a Christian background and scholars who have a non-Christian background. And then you have these 6 facts that I'm getting ready to share with you that have so many independent lines of evidence supporting each and every one of them that everybody was able to come to a consensus about them. Okay, these 6 things certainly must have taken place, okay? And here are the 6 facts. Number 1, Jesus died by crucifixion. Jesus died by crucifixion. That is, skeptical scholars, non-skeptical scholars admit the crucifixion took place. Why is that important? He died. You have to establish that Jesus did in fact die. Why? Because if he didn't die, then that gives support to the really inadequate hypothesis that he was resuscitated after a near-death experience, right? So this is how some of the skeptics would originally object, but we have a consensus in New Testament scholarship that we have medical verification of the death of Jesus Christ. Not only from a biblical standpoint, but from like Josephus stating that Pontius Pilate. And then thirdly, we'll get into that actually in just a moment, we'll deal with the 3 major alternative explanations to the resurrection. But at the end of the day, we can establish with scholastic credibility, Jesus died. Not just any death, but a death by crucifixion. Okay? Number 2, Jesus was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. So the burial is important. Why? Anybody know? Why is the burial important? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the third fact is that afterwards, a group of his female followers found his tomb empty. All right, so this is important to know. He was buried in a sealed tomb. Because if he wasn't buried in a sealed tomb, then the third part of these 6 facts is irrelevant, that his tomb was found empty. The empty tomb is actually good evidence that something strange happened to the body of Jesus. Now, what are some plausible explanations of the tomb being empty? Some people would say the body was stolen. Okay. Why then did the apostles give their lives for a resurrected Jesus? Does it make sense that they would give their lives for a stolen body? What makes better sense? That they believed the empty tomb was a result of a resurrected Jesus Christ. So you have to, when you ask yourself if alternative explanations are good, you have to understand, does that alternative explanation fit with all 6 facts? Okay, we'll get through the rest of the 6 facts. Did that make sense to anybody, what I just said? Okay. So, Jesus died. He was buried. His tomb was found empty. Number 4, afterward, his disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that he rose from the dead, despite every predisposition to the contrary. Okay? Historians agree. The apostles believed that Jesus resurrected from the dead. So much so that it doesn't really make sense that they would believe that based upon their activities that proceeded from that. Right? If their belief in Jesus' resurrection from the dead was some kind of temporary, lapse of judgment, that doesn't fit well with the idea of persevering for 40 years plus each in different locations of the planet, maintaining this supposed conspiracy and dying for it in different regions of the world. So, scholars agree that the disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that Jesus resurrected from the dead, despite every predisposition to the contrary. That is, you didn't get a brand new Ferrari for testifying to the resurrection of Jesus. You got lashed with 39 lashes. You got crucified along with him. You got some Christians burnt at the stake. Bartholomew got skinned alive. Thomas in India got speared to death. John the Apostle got boiled in oil. I mean, come on. Peter got crucified upside down in Rome. These weren't neat little deaths of, what is it called that we do today where they inject potassium into lethal injection. These were horrific deaths, giving the apostles every opportunity to renounce this supposed lie. You guys get where we're going with this? All right. Number 5, Jesus' brothers. All scholars agree, Jesus' brothers who were previously non-believers and skeptical came to believe in the resurrection afterwards. Now think about that for a moment. Yes, Jason.
Where is the evidence of that they were not believers or resurrection? Where is that?
That's in the Gospels. Yeah. They didn't accept him. Right after he was rejected at Nazareth, it gives it. Yeah. Yep. And the Apostle Paul there in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 says that Jesus appeared to the apostles and to James and then to me as one untimely born. And then we know Jude is also one of the brothers of Jesus who wrote an epistle. But we know from the gospel narratives and others, there's no reason. This is why both non-Christian and Christian scholars agree. James and Jude, namely James and Jude, came to believe, even though they previously didn't, that Jesus resurrected from the dead. Go ahead.
They did, so why were they following him around?
They weren't. They weren't his disciples. His brothers, all of them. But James and Jude are the ones that we know for sure came to a sincere belief in the resurrection because we have books written by them in the New Testament. James and Jude. Nope, James and Jude. Yeah, no problem. All right, so this is a monumental realization that we have historical validation that the brothers of Jesus rejected him at first. All right, think about that. Then he gets killed by crucifixion. I mean, this was a public event. There's nothing we can correspond to. It's like a public hanging and everybody knows what just happened. And you had rejected his claims about himself for his entire ministry. And then somehow, all of a sudden, just after his death by crucifixion, these previous non-believers are now going around saying Jesus has resurrected from the dead. Now you have to ask yourself, what is the best explanation for that historical fact? There's no better explanation than the resurrection occurred. Otherwise, we're really going to have to make up some pretty strange stuff to try to explain that the brothers of Jesus changed their mind. And then 6, the final fact that the consensus of New Testament scholars agree upon is that Paul, a previous persecutor of Jesus, came to believe in the resurrection no later than 2 years after the event occurred. So this is even like a stronger kind of a demonstration of what we see on a very small scale with James and Jude. We see now not only a non-believer, but a violent persecutor drastically changing and giving two, in the book of Acts, we see Luke recording Paul's experience, and then we see Luke recording Paul's testimony of the same event to the Roman governors as he was undergoing trial. And so we have two documentations, one from the record of Luke, the second from the mouth of the Apostle Paul himself, saying that he was, and then in multiple epistles, him saying, I used to be a zealous Jew who persecuted the church of God, and I met Jesus, and my life was changed, right? So very interesting in terms of the 6 facts. Let's kind of review those real quick. Jesus died by crucifixion, number 1. Number 2, Jesus was buried. Number 3, his female followers found the tomb empty. Number 4, his disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe in the resurrection. Number 5, his unbelieving brothers suddenly and sincerely came to believe in the resurrection. And number 6, his greatest enemy, the persecutor, the Apostle Paul, also came to believe in the resurrection despite all odds. So, we must ask ourselves, in light of these 6 historical facts, what explains them best? As a body, a collective body of facts. Do you see where I'm coming from on this? So we can make up explanations to try to say, well, here's how people, Christianity got started. But we must ask, is that reasonable and does that fit well with what we know to be factually true from history? So, some popular inadequate explanations. The first one is called the swoon theory, or the Jesus didn't really die theory. We touched on that for just a moment, which even the early Roman historians rejected, such as Josephus and others, Tacitus. They both affirmed that Pontius Pilate had Jesus executed under Roman law. So we have not just the gospel records showing the execution to be completed. Also, we find the medical evidence within the gospel record where they took a spear and they shoved it into Jesus' side to check and see if he was still alive or not. When they pulled it out, what came out? Water and blood. Does anybody know why that's significant? What's the pericardium? I like that word. It's a good word, ain't it? So the pericardium is that sac that protects your heart. And when you die or when you have like a rupture or a cardiac arrest, it will fill with water. And so it was not only a spear being driven through his side, but medical evidence coming out when they pull it out. So Secondly, when someone is condemned to crucifixion, it is laughable to think that the officiators, the Roman officiators of the death sentence, would actually let the prisoner somehow go undetected and still alive. Because the penalty for such a thing in ancient Rome was, you get to die now. If you were to allow a criminal who was sentenced to death to somehow escape still alive, your life was on the line. This is why there was no ancient objections in terms of even the Tacitus record and the Josephus record regarding the death of Jesus Christ. So the idea that Jesus was just kind of almost dead and then crawled out of the tomb and made it to a doctor or something like that is really actually quite funny if you think about it, because it doesn't add up with anything. It doesn't add up with the fact of how Romans performed executions. Secondly, it doesn't fit with the boldness of the apostles subsequent to the resurrection. So think if Jesus, let's say this is true, okay? Jesus crawled out of the tomb barely alive and somehow without any antibiotics, you've gotten pretty much all your skin ripped off your body and you're going to survive infection and somehow, is that someone that you're going to be like, you know what, I'm going to go preach that he resurrected from the dead and I'm going to die for it. This glorious resurrected Lord who crawled out of the tomb half dead and through the attention of a doctor or whatever, somehow was resuscitated over many weeks, and now I'm going to go around and give my life for this individual who, if that was the case, later died anyways. Is that a good explanation? Does that sound like someone who's really thinking this thing through to make that up? Or does that sound like someone who's just adamantly opposed to even giving any credence to the resurrection, and they just have to make something up to get the reality of it out of their mind? That's what it sounds like when you're making up silly stuff like that. So, inadequate. It's an inadequate explanation. Does everybody agree with me on that? Swoon theory is dead. Maybe we should put it that way. Dead indeed. No? Swoon. He was swooned back to life. He was almost dead and they swooned him, right? Do you understand? Yes. Joseph of Arimathea. He was a Jewish leader and elder of the time. He gave Jesus his tomb and helped bury his body, yes. The tomb was sealed by the Roman officials because of rumors that Jesus was going to resurrect from the dead. So there was rumors that he would resurrect from the dead. Normally you wouldn't seal a tomb. Someone was crucified. Normally you don't, unless it was a Jewish person, you don't even put him in a tomb. But he was given an honorable burial as a Jewish person who was crucified on the Sabbath, or leading into the Passover Sabbath, which is a special Sabbath. And you normally don't seal a tomb. Who's going to steal the body, But the reason they sealed the tomb is because they were afraid the body was going to come back to life.
Okay, so this Joseph guy, put him in it.
Yeah, him and Nicodemus, yep. And the Romans sealed it, and they posted guards out front of it, okay? Because they were concerned that either the body was going to be stolen or that Jesus was going to resurrect from the dead. Okay? So Jesus was buried. All right, the second hypothesis that is quite popular that gets put forward by skeptics is what we call the mass hallucination hypothesis. Okay? You'll hear this one. Mass hallucination. That is, these 513 early witnesses all had exact hallucinations of this resurrected Jesus in some way. Is anybody convinced of that here? When I say that, it's hard to even say it without chuckling a little bit. 513 people. Have you ever heard of that at all? How many people that claimed to be the Messiah died in ancient Judea? A lot. And how many of them had 513 people hallucinate that they resurrected from the dead and then gave their lives for it and started the greatest movement that ever existed on planet Earth? Do I even have to debunk this one? Oh, all right. Multiple problems. One is the diversity of resurrection appearances. All right, to persuade someone that a mass hallucination occurred, it would be more tenable if the hallucination happened with one group in one location at one time. So let's say all of us were in one room at one time, and somehow, because we were in some deep state of grief, we all thought we saw the ghost of our loved one. I mean, does that even sound like something that even happens? Like, is that a thing? Maybe. I don't know. Like, super low probability. Maybe if there was like a little tiny group of maybe 5 or 10 people in deep depression and despair, and they thought they saw the ghost of their loved one. That's the best you can come up with. However, the resurrection appearances of Jesus are diverse. They're with multiple individuals in multiple places, multiple groups. So you got him appearing to individuals, to groups, different locations, over a 40-day period. Now, tell me how you explain that away with the idea of mass hallucination. Secondly, as we refer to in the 6 facts, you have the brothers of Jesus who are skeptics. Why would they hallucinate that their brother had come back from the dead? They probably believed that he deserved to be crucified as a blasphemer because he went around claiming to be the Son of God, and he shouldn't have. Why would they, along with the other 513, now be convinced that he resurrected from the dead? None of this adds up, does it? You have to ask yourself, is that the best explanation? It's barely an explanation to begin with. The best explanation of 513 early eyewitnesses of the resurrection of Jesus is that there was a resurrection of Jesus, and he, over a 40-day period, which is about as much time as it would take to present yourself to up to 500 people, did in fact, in bodily form, present himself to the witnesses. And many of those witnesses dying for the very fact that they testified to this matter. Okay? That's the best explanation. Any questions so far? Is this making sense? The third most popular objection, or what I would say is inadequate explanation, is what we call the elaborate conspiracy hypothesis. Elaborate conspiracy hypothesis. For example, Warner Wallace, the forensics expert, the guy I was telling you about, who was a cold case detective in LA and then came to believe in Jesus, he says, you need 5 minimum requirements for a successful conspiracy to occur. Number 1 is you need a small number of conspirators. This is a guy who studied crime his whole life. Preferably no more than 2 for a conspiracy to succeed. In the case of the New Testament, we have a reported 513 witnesses. So it fails the first test of a successful conspiracy. Number 2, you need a short conspiracy time span. You need to keep in mind in this regard that the apostles preached the resurrection without defecting for up to 40 years. So it fails that test of a successful conspiracy. Number 3, you need excellent communication. You got to be able to stay in cahoots with one another. Hey, bro, you haven't told a lie yet. You know why detectives, when they are interviewing witnesses, they separate them out? Because he's going to come to Robert and he's going to say, hey, man, Kenny, he bailed out on you, bro. He told me you did it, man. You need to just fess up. And then they're going to go to Kenny, hey, man, he snitched on you, dude. You know you did it. And one of y'all is going to confess, oh, man, he sold me out. Yeah, it was me. And that's how they figure out who did it. That's why you need excellent communication. You got to be able to have a phone line where you can call up Robert. Hey, man, they're telling me you snitched on me. Is this a lie? Right? And then you're able to maintain the conspiracy. Now, how excellent was the communication between these 513 Christians in the ancient world who, through persecution, were scattered everywhere from Israel to Rome to Africa to Europe to Asia. You see the point? And if you want to communicate, you send a piece of papyrus by horseback. I mean, come on. And they're going to maintain an elaborate conspiracy between 513. How come we have no ancient records of a mass defection, of this huge admission that it was all untrue under intense persecution? Because it was true. And they really did all give their lives, or in a great number gave their lives for this event. Number 4, you need strong familial relationships. They found through, studying conspiracies, normally it's best between family members, like mafia, type stuff, where you got just a few people in on the murder, and they have strong familial ties, they have excellent communication, it's a short time span, and so forth. 513 witnesses. Do I need to tell you how there was, dozens and dozens of families involved and dozens of people involved and all scattered out, right? Fails that. It fails almost every one of them. And then number 5, for a conspiracy to normally succeed is that you need little to almost no pressure to confess. That is, you can't be having the cops find out about it and start interrogating people. Once that happens, normally the conspiracy falls apart unless you have all 4 of the other elements. The small number of conspirators, the short time span, the excellent communication. If you have all of those, you might be able to survive the pressure to confess. But outside of that, it's going to fall apart as soon as somebody finds out about it and starts questioning. Now, may I remind you how the apostles died and how many other early Christians died? Intense pressure to confess. Yet, we have nothing showing of any renunciation of these true things. As a matter of fact, we see the power of the Spirit given to the early Christians so that they could persevere through the persecution and maintain a faithful witness to the things that did in fact occur. So, we have all of the 3 major objections to the 6 facts about Jesus' resurrection failing. That is the Jesus didn't really die theory, the mass hallucination theory, and the elaborate conspiracy hypothesis. Now, the claims of Christianity have none of the minimum requirements in terms of being able to make the elaborate conspiracy hypothesis tenable. Being that the main proposals from skeptics are found to be left wanting in every way, we can arrive at the realization that even though these alternative explanations could be presented as possible, they cannot be presented as reasonable. You guys see where I'm going with that? It's possible that Jesus didn't really die. Like, very unlikely. But we could, if we're reasonable and we're thinking about these things, we have to at least say, all right, let me research that and see if it's true. Let me at least give it enough credence to where I can actually research it objectively. But just because something's possible doesn't mean it's reasonable. Does it make sense? This is why we keep getting back to what is the best explanation. All right? Mass hallucination. Is that possible? Not very, but I guess you could say in some strange world it is. But is it reasonable? Absolutely not. The moment you start thinking about it, you can't believe someone actually would buy that. And then thirdly, the elaborate conspiracy. After looking at those 5 minimum requirements for any kind of conspiracy to succeed, you could say it's possible for a situation in which those 5 rules are violated for the conspiracy to still succeed, but it's not reasonable. So at the end of the day, we have good reason on our side. We're able to say the most reasonable conclusion in light of the facts that all scholars in this field agree on is that Jesus did in fact rise from the dead. So not only are you siding with truth, but you're actually siding with that which the evidence, unequivocally supports. We need to understand that our faith is reasonable. Our faith is something that is not without foundation. You actually see this principle in terms of faith all the time. I mean, I had faith that the table would hold these papers. I'm not just coming up here saying magic is holding these papers up. I have good reason to believe that when I put these papers here, they're going to stay. So you can have a foundation for your faith. Like, if someone asked you, why do you believe Jesus resurrected from the dead? Maybe most of you would answer, because I encountered the Holy Spirit and God convicted me of my sins and I came to believe that He resurrected from the dead. And that's fine. But we also can go a little bit deeper and say, I have also good reasons undergirding that ultimate spiritual belief that I have. It's not just something I had come to believe in without good reasons to support it. And so we're living in a time where skeptics are on pretty much everywhere you look. And some of them aren't hostile. Some of them honestly have been misled by the hostile skeptics, right? Maybe they met someone who was hostile to Christianity, and that person filled their head with all of these skeptical lies. And by knowing the truth about the resurrection, we can help untangle some of that in well-meaning individuals who really do want to know the truth about it. So our job as Bible students is to be well-versed on the reasonability of what we believe so that we can do exactly what the Apostle Peter commanded us to do, where he said, be ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within us. Amen. I'm going to end with a quote from Chuck Colson. I heard this quote from Pastor Roger one day, and I thought it went well with this. But Chuck Colson is the special counsel to President Nixon during the Watergate scandal. And this is what he said. He said, I know that the resurrection is a fact, and Watergate proved it to me. If you know what Watergate is, it was this big scandal that happened in the White House back in the 70s. Here's what he says. Watergate proved it to me. How? Because 12 men testified that they had seen Jesus risen from the dead. Then they proclaimed the truth for 40 years, never once denying it. Every one was beaten, tortured, stoned, and put in prison. They would not have endured that if it weren't true. Watergate embroiled 12 of the most powerful men in the world, and they could not keep the lie for more than 3 weeks. You're telling me that 12 apostles could keep a lie for 40 years? Absolutely impossible. So I thought that was a pretty cool quote from the special counsel, but that's what I say. The facts are best managed and explained by the simple conclusion that the early Christians gave us unanimously. Jesus resurrected from the dead, and because of him, we can have hope. Amen? Let's pray. Father, we thank you tonight for this opportunity to just talk about the foundations of what we believe, and that, God, we can walk away from this time with even better basis to worship you as the maker of heaven and earth, as the one who has the keys to death, Hades, and to life everlasting. Father, we thank you so much for raising Jesus from the dead so that we can receive justification and the forgiveness of sins, but also so that we can have a living hope for the future where our bodies will be raised in the likeness of his. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you for watching today's episode of Does God Exist? If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. If you want to help me make more of these videos, you can visit the Patreon link in the video description. Also, make sure you hit the notification bell so that you don't miss an episode. We'll see you next time.